How's it going, everyone? It's Harvey from Weather Sponge 5000, and in this video we're going to focus on our next potential tropical disturbance that could potentially develop into Tropical Storm Bonnie and maybe even Hurricane Bonnie by next week. But before I begin, make sure to subscribe if you want to see more weather content. Make sure to like if you like this video, and make sure to turn on post notifications if you want to see even more weather content. So let's begin by taking a look at the GFS model, or at least how it depicts the radar to look like in the near future. And you see that we do have quite a formidable tropical cyclone moving through just off the Central American coast, and this is going far out. This is 228 hours from now, but it's very interesting to see that the GFS model wants to develop a borderline hurricane or maybe a hurricane by next week, which is very interesting. So of course this is very far out if I were to move a little bit closer to the future. However, we do see that the GFS model does depict that a formidable low pressure system should develop off the Panama coastline right around the 7-day mark, which is very interesting because the GFS model does expect a plume of moisture to move northward, and when it's over a body of water this warm just off the Central American coast, then we're bound to have the possibility of a tropical cyclone developing, which is definitely something to be aware of, as it's typical during the early part of the hurricane season. We do see these gyres develop right around Central America, which could create favorable conditions for where a tropical cyclone could develop, and this may be one of those cases if we were to continue to move forward. The GFS model is very persistent on rapidly intensifying this, because we do see if I were to go even further, this becomes very concerning because the pressure drops down to 947 millibars, pretty much going directly at Cancun, at least in this depiction. But of course, don't really take this seriously at all because this is going 294 hours out, but it really goes to show you that we could maybe see a developing tropical cyclone by next week, where of course by a 7-day mark we could see some low pressure system develop just off the Central American coastline. However, if we were to take a look at the European model isn't really expecting any of that. Taking a look at the 0Z run, which is the latest depiction around the 168 to 74 hour mark, while the European model is forecasting a plume of moisture to move into the Caribbean Sea, it doesn't really expect anything to develop out of it. And if I were to continue to move even forward, you see that nothing really develops, not even a small low pressure system just off the Central American coastline, which does raise the uncertainty, as it's going to be one of those battles between the European and the GFS model, and they're going to really need to iron out the forecast to really determine if we will see a tropical cyclone develop just off the Central American coast. And the reason why the European model currently does not want to develop really anything by next week is because the European model is depicting a lot more dry air and stable air to be over the Caribbean as well as the Gulf of Mexico at this time. If we were to take a look right around the 200-hour mark or the 7-day mark, we do see that while there is a little bit of moisture just off the Central American coast, and we do see quite a bit of moisture throughout southern Mexico and along the eastern Pacific, there's still the amount of moisture located in the Caribbean around the southwestern portion of the Caribbean isn't really enough to really sustain a tropical cyclone or to really develop any sort of tropical cyclone. Compare that to the GFS model, and the GFS model is forecasting a lot more moisture, a much more moist environment. So this amount of humidity is more than enough for a rapid amount of convection to occur that's rapid enough to support for tropical cyclone development. So the amount of moisture will be key in determining whether this develops or not into next week, which would be right around the Tuesday timeframe, June 14th. If this were to develop, it would be right around the southwestern portion of the Caribbean, and we really need to determine how much moisture there will be. And it's not only the moisture that could be an inhibiting factor for this potential tropical cyclone, it's also the wind shear. But the GFS model is very lenient in bringing a low sheared environment, which does have me skeptical because it's very rare for a tropical cyclone for the duration of this entire period, pretty much from the coast of Colombia all the way as far north as the Gulf of Mexico to really experience little to no wind shear at all, as that's extremely rare for the month of June because, of course, during the early months of the hurricane season, June and July, the northern Atlantic still is highly sheared. However, the GFS model is forecasting, for the most part, a lightly sheared environment as it moves northward because the GFS model does expect a little bit of an upper level high to develop over this low pressure system, so that should create a lot of divergence in the upper levels, which should promote more tropical cyclone development because the air molecules aloft are less stable, and as a result of the divergence, it allows for a lot more convection and an upward motion around the center circulation to occur, which would promote a stronger storm as a result of an increased amount of convection. As you see that the wind shear is quite light in the GFS model's depiction of this potential storm. And if we were to take a look at the European model, however, you see that the European model is definitely forecasting a higher amount of shear throughout the southwestern Caribbean, and it's going against the direction of the storm, which does not help the storm's chances at all. We do see that there's quite a bit of wind shear moving through the Caribbean as well as the Gulf of Mexico. It isn't a ton, but it's just enough to where it'll inhibit it, and due to the fact that there isn't a lot of moisture surrounding this potential storm at all, then that wind shear would definitely help push a lot of that dry air closer to the Gulf of Mexico into this potential low pressure system, which would inhibit its chances from developing. So still a lot of questions. We need to really determine which forecast will be the more correct one, and both computer models will need to iron out the forecast over the next several days. Still a lot of uncertainty because, of course, forecasting something around 7 days out, there's still a lot that could change, but I'll make sure to update you guys once once the forecast does become more confident between the two computer models. And right now, I'm sort of leaning more towards the European model because I feel like the GFS model's depiction is a little bit atypical for what we see for the month of June, where we see a little bit more wind shear throughout the Gulf of Mexico and Caribbean. But the GFS model, we definitely need to also take that into heavy consideration because it's a very reliable model and we can't just disregard it just because it might go against what typically happens during this month, because we have seen that before, of course, in the weather where storms develop in conditions that aren't really meant for a tropical cyclone to develop. So it could be one of those scenarios where the GFS model might be correct. So we can't disregard the GFS model either. Definitely uncertainty, but I'll keep you guys updated once we get more updates. And another reason why I'm sort of leaning more towards the European model's case is if we were to take a look at the Saharan dust forecast for the Northern Atlantic, and if we were to take a look at the forecast for Friday, June 10th, we're going to see an influx of Saharan dust move into the Caribbean and even as far west as the Gulf of Mexico. And this would inhibit tropical cyclone development because the thing is that with Saharan dust, the dust is warmer than the water vapor or the air molecules that are along the surface. So as a result, that creates a temperature inversion in the mid-levels of the atmosphere where the warmer air molecules along the surface as well as the water vapor will be forced to sink downward rather than upward because, of course, cooler air mass sinks, and in this case where there's a lot of Saharan dust in the mid-levels of the atmosphere, the surface air is cooler than the Saharan dust, so that pretty much inhibits convection, that inhibits an upward motion in the atmosphere, which as a result inhibits tropical cyclone development as a result of a high amount of Saharan dust. And you see that the forecast is that we should see Saharan dust move into the Caribbean as well as the Gulf of Mexico over the next couple of days. Now, the tropical cyclone that has the possibility of developing won't really have a possibility until 7 to 10 days from now. So there's still a lot of time for this Saharan dust to move away from the southwestern Caribbean, but it's going to be somewhat difficult for that to happen. I'd say within the next 7 to 10 days. So this could be the inhibiting factor that will inhibit tropical cyclone development, not only for the next couple of days, but possibly for the next couple weeks, which isn't uncommon during the early months of the hurricane season, where we do see a lot of Saharan dust move westward into the Caribbean and the Gulf of Mexico. So as a result, I'm leaning a little bit more to European model, where it isn't developing anything, but the GFS model still could easily be correct, and we're definitely going to need to take a look at both computer models over the next several days to determine which one will be the more correct one. Taking a look at the 5-day tropical weather outlook, you see, of course, the National Hurricane Center isn't really forecasting much of anything to develop within the next 5 days as a result of just a lack of instability right around the Gulf of Mexico and the Caribbean. But of course, what I'm forecasting is beyond the 5-day mark, so do not take this as an indication that there won't be any sort of tropical cyclones in the near future, because that could be possible right around the 7-day mark in the southwestern Caribbean. So if I were to show you guys also the MJO filtered forecast, we do see that we're expected to be in a negative MJO pattern, which is more favorable for tropical cyclone development within the next week. So that should increase the chance of a tropical cyclone developing into next week. So make sure to keep that in mind. Now, taking a look at my forecast, pretty much the same as my previous video. If Tropical Storm Bonnie were to develop, it would develop somewhere in this area. We're also gonna need to determine the track of this potential low pressure system, because that will be a huge indicator in whether this will develop or not, because if it does deal with a lot of land interaction, then it's less likely to develop. So we need to see this develop a little bit further eastward, closer to the water, to where it could enhance its chance of developing. But we're definitely going to need to pay close attention to this over the next several days, and I'll keep you guys updated as we get more certainty. But anyways, guys, I thank you guys for watching. Make sure to subscribe if you want to see more weather-related content and more tropical updates like this, and I hope you all have a great day.